Welcome. In this video, I'll be discussing how Kaleidoscope can be used to triage phishing and spear phishing emails, identify the associated components, and work through the process of analyzing their malicious nature and whether or not there are other potential phishing campaigns going on in tandem with this phishing email. Within Kaleidoscope, we have a variety of methods by which you can ingest email files. We have a direct methodology for email parsing where we can pull in the file itself and have it analyzed by our file engine. That would work in any circumstance in which you download a .eml file, whether from Outlook or from any other sort of email provider, and you can bring it in here to analyze that file directly. We also have an automated ingest system that can be hooked up to your existing mail server and alerting rules through API keys, for example, in Google Workspace. In this particular example, I'll be looking at an alert that we have coming from existing alerting systems. We can see here in my notifications, I have a phishing alert from a Vivian Denisic iCloud account that's being sent to our systems, and so I can bring up that email message. This email message will be parsed and processed alongside that alert. So when that alerting rule goes off, we then can ingest that file, pull out the associated header information, tokenize the pieces that fit the data model, and make the associated connections to sort of jumpstart any analysis process that your security engineers or analysts are engaged in from there. Here I've been taken to the phishing emails data page. In this data page, I can see the content, the body of what was actually in that email. In this particular case, we have an HTML email with some script tags as well as some styling. And we also have the associated header information and what's being parsed out. So we can see the subject here of that email, as well as the associated content, the raw email content in its entirety, and any sort of signature information that we have parsed out from this. So I can then take this file and start my investigation process. So, possibly off the bat, we might want to take a look at some of this obfuscated JavaScript, but for the purposes of our investigation, we want to be able to tie this to any other email activity that we're seeing and determine the maliciousness of this email itself. So obviously, by pulling in this information and tokenizing it, we can already do some amount of parsing of based on prior emails we've seen, if those email addresses we know of are already determined malicious through prior activity. However, we wanted to provide a mechanism by which you can actually begin your investigation. So in order to do that, I'm going to take this into one of our workbooks, and I'm actually going to create a new workbook as part of this process. So here I can create a phishing workbook for a signature doc, and this is a signature doc email phishing lure. And in this case, we know it was sent to Ryan Warren, so I'm going to include that information as part of our description here. And now we can take that and we can put it into a phishing workbook. By designating this as a phishing workbook, that's going to give us some additional functionality, some automated parsing as part of the workbook rendering. We could also process this as part of a generic workbook, but we will get a little bit of help in our investigation as part of that. We can see here I am bringing in the nodes. In particular, I'm bringing in that email phishing node. I could also add other nodes at this point if I wanted to, but we'll start here for this investigation. So now I am going to go bring up that workbook. That is this one right here. And so we can already see, because we've designated this as a phishing workbook, we can already see where we're going to get the binning of the email addresses associated, any attachments and emails as we go through our investigation. We also have the actual email content here brought in on this homepage, and if we get other emails that we identify as part of this campaign, those will also be available here. So I have no connections yet. I haven't done a lot of looking into any of the specific nodes or walking the tree for this yet. So at this point, in our processing journey as analysts, we want to be able to take this information and start to work through the pieces of it and find anything that might be connected. So because we're already parsing all of this as part of Kaleidoscope's ETL pipeline, I can now take this email into our connections view, and I can see our email here, and I can begin to pivot off of the information we identified. So for example, we know that this was sent to Ryan Warnes. We also know that it was sent from this account. So now we've tokenized these components, and they are available in our data set. And we actually have some earlier ingestions for these that might be of interest later that we could continue our investigation with. But I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this situated so I can also pull in 2 additional file hash pieces that were parsed here. And we can take a quick look at these. So this one is the actual attachment component information, and this one is some other additional body parsing information. So we can see this is our actual body of the email, and here we have the attachment for that. And we do have some prior knowledge of this attachment. It is being parsed from data providers, and in particular, in this case, we are actually sourcing that internally. Any user of Outcomes platform will have any designations that Outcomes Security can make as to the malicious nature of any particular file hash or associated campaign information. So we do already know from prior investigation at Outcome that this is in fact a malicious hash. So in addition to this, we may want to now try and determine, I think that we can safely say, assuming you trust Outcomes designation, you may want to look into this further, see if you can find it in VirusTotal or any other sources to confirm kind of this assessment. But if we take it at face value, which of course we think you should, this hash is determined as malicious, so we can safely say that this email is a intended phish and is designed to get the user to download their malware. But the follow-up to this is, how are we going to go about identifying if this is a larger campaign that's targeting our organization, and if there are any other emails we want to find and use as part of our investigation remediation efforts. So in order to build detections and limit this campaign's effect on our network, we want to be able to have a full idea of the scope. So one way we might do that in this particular case is to take a look at this hash and see if we have any other parsed emails that have included this attachment hash and subsequently are part of that same campaign. So in this particular case, we can see that same email address that we already found, or that same email message that we already found before, the ones directed at Ryan Warnes. We also have one here directed at Pat Talcott. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull that in as well. And we can see here, this actually has a slightly different email content format. This is the node details for that particular node. And so I can actually see what was included as part of that right here in the graph editor. And of course, now these nodes are part of the workbook. So we'll also see those on that workbook hub and in our nodes page I can show in a second. As we continue that investigation, we can identify, of course, who this was sent to, as well as who was the sender. In this case, we now have 2 associated emails of senders of this campaign, and that can be useful to us in our investigation going forward as we seek to remediate these, block them, and potentially we could report this information if we find that there is significant abuse happening from these email addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and pull in the rest of these attachments and the actual body. This attachment was the one that we had identified previously, and this one is the actual body of the email. And so now we've sort of built out our connections graph associated with this information from this phishing campaign. In addition to this, we now have all of this as part of our larger workbook space. So this gives us an effective way to show you how in Kaleidoscope we can pivot based on data that we've ingested. And those things can all happen sort of automatically in the back end. You'll note that I brought in no particular files, no additional emails. These were all ingested through our automated pipelines and flagged by alerting rules we had previously. And we can also make additional designations about these nodes going forward, and they will be codified and stored in our model for the future. Now returning back to our sort of overview page, now that we've actually populated this workbook with associated nodes, we now have a collection of the email addresses that were included, the emails that are involved in all of this activity, as well as attachment information that was part of this email campaign. And we can also see side by side here where this was the second email we identified and the body of it, and this is the prior email, the original find for all of this. So this is kind of the beginning of our investigation process as we go through this analysis. In this particular case, we already have designations of some of these as malicious. Those designations are ones that we could also do ourselves at this point. But at this point, for the sake of time and convenience, we're going to say that these are in fact malicious emails, and we would like to report them as such, as sort of the conclusion or the conclusive evidence for our associated investigation. So at this point, we have other tools that we could employ. We could bring in other files or information as we see fit, but I am going to cut this analysis here and kind of move into our reporting phase. So in the interest of, obviously we've worked through all the pivoting of the data that's in our model, and we've identified these as part of a larger campaign. In order to provide that information through to the folks who are doing remediation, detection engineering for our organization, we'll want to ship that as a sort of reported component. So I will not be going in detail into filling out this report builder, but we do have a report templating process that can enable you to kind of work through this reporting process more quickly. So you can see here I've got a couple individualized components for where we might want to insert some information into our report. But in the interest of just kind of showing how much we bring through as that data, I can now just move straight into our report preview, which will put all of that data that I have entered into that form into our finalized report. And you saw there I put in no additional information. By parsing and handling the data that is in the workbook itself, we're able to very quickly generate large portions of this report for the purposes of shipping it on to the next team, or just codifying it for future reference as we encounter further phishing campaigns or activity from this campaign. We may want to be able to reference what we had found in this particular phishing campaign, and we can use that in the future. So now, as I am, going through that investigation process that I showed a moment ago, we're aggregating all of this information together and being provided a finalized kind of phishing report that, of course, further information can be added as we see fit. If we wanted to go into more detail about some of this, if we took a look at that HTML, we could identify what the path of infection looks like. We could identify, additional components that we might want to include, and we can of course tag any sort of data that we have as part of that process to include in our final report. So it doesn't end with the auto generation, and we do provide analysts the ability to continue to build on that information. But I think this is an effective way to bring through some of that information that we've gathered as part of our analysis process, and this can be a huge boon in the process of getting to that and getting out of that reporting phase, which can take up a significant portion of an investigation. So that'll be it for this particular instance. Look forward to some future videos where we'll be talking about other use cases for investigation analysis in the platform, as well as the methods by which we are handling data. Thank you for your time.